I'm about to tell you why you should be buying Intel and not AMD. Welcome back to FTW Tech. I'm your host, Isaiah. I have not uploaded in a while. You may notice that. But today, we're going to be going over Intel Alder Lake. I'm going to tell you all the things that I'm excited about with the new platform, why it's good for you, and just generally go over all the new changes. Now, I'm not going to go in depth about new features such as like VBS, and things like that, and the thread director and all that. If you want detailed testing and results on the impact of those new technologies with Windows 11 and things along those lines, definitely go watch Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed. They make amazing content. Now, let's get into my Alder Lake analysis. On November 4th, Intel launched its first 6 Alder Lake processors. The 12600KF, 12600K, 12700KF, 12700K, 12900KF, and 12900K. They have been received very favorably by reviewers, and it looks like Intel is finally offering AMD some stiff competition. In fact, the higher-end AMD Zen 3 chips are already discounted, which is amazing for consumers. I expect they will be further discounted following the release of lower-end Alder Lake chips, assuming they perform as well as their expensive cousins. So I will get into that soon. Also, I want to point out I'm not using my mic right now, as my PC is currently out of commission upstairs waiting to be rebuilt in a different case, so the sound quality might not be amazing. With Alder Lake, Intel released a revolutionary architecture based on Intel's new hybrid technology. Essentially, in each 12th gen desktop processor, there are performance cores, or P cores, based on Intel's Golden Cove microarchitecture, and efficiency cores, or E cores, based on the Gracemont architecture. Each type of core performs different functions. The P cores are just upgraded versions of Rocket Lake cores with a standard generational improvement. The exciting part, however, is the E core design. The new E cores focus on maximizing performance per watt. If your PC doesn't need the power of the Golden Cove cores, Intel Thread Director will instead use the E cores. The P cores have hyper-threading while the E cores do not. The 12600 chips have 10 cores, 6 P cores, and 4 E cores, and 16 threads. The 12700 chips have 12 cores, 8 P and 4 E, and 20 threads. The 12900 chips have 16 cores, 8 P and 8 E, and 24 threads. Intel is no longer looking so meek on the spec sheet. This is getting really interesting. Oh, and Intel finally dished 14 nanometer for 10 nanometer. Nice. Oh, as Jay's 2 cents would say, this is like a talking head video, so feel free to minimize the video, listen to it in the background. There's not going to be any really important graphics on screen or anything, but yeah. So I just wanted to get that one out there before we continue. Before I move on with performance, power, and pricing summaries, I need to let you know that this is not a review of the Alder Lake chips. I do not own any Alder Lake processors, as I'm a small YouTuber who can't afford to buy them and doesn't get review samples. Rather, this is an analysis of the impact Alder Lake will have on the CPU market, why the processors are so revolutionary, and whether or not you should buy them. Intel's thermal design power, or TDP metric, was meant to signify how much power a processor will consume. It has always been flawed, as it has relied on base clock speeds rather than boost frequencies. Intel has likely done this to make it look as if they have been on par with AMD in terms of thermal output and power consumption, but they fell behind. Not anymore. Intel now lists 2 power specifications on Alder Lake chips: processor base power, or PBP, and maximum turbo power, or MTP. This new specification, MTP, makes information more forthcoming on which CPU cooler will be adequate to cool your Alder Lake CPU. If it wasn't clear, look at the MTP to determine the best cooler for you, then match it to the TDP listed on the CPU cooler's spec sheet. And of course, I did mention Jay's 2 cents earlier. You have to rep Jay's 2 cents merch, digressing since 2012. You guys know how it goes. You gotta rep Jay's 2 cents. Intel, it seems, has taken after AMD's example by undercutting Ryzen to regain market share. Alder Lake pricing is mighty impressive for Team Blue. The 10-core 16-thread 12600K is $290 versus the 5600X's $300. The 12-core 20-thread 12700K is just $410 compared with $450 for the 5800X, and the 16-core 24-thread 12900K sits at $590, which seems appropriate as it falls between the 5900X and 5950X. Of course, feel free to get the K SKUs if you don't plan on overclocking. You can save even more money. Intel has unfortunately not learned from the worldwide chip shortage and the intense criticism from the gaming community, as it's kind of hard to find the new chips at MSRP. They're available, but they're marked up, with the 12600K currently retailing for $320, the 12700K going for $450, and the 12900K up at $620 on Best Buy's website. I would wait before purchasing these chips until you can find them at MSRP and Micro Center or online in a few weeks. Prepare to be blown away. After reading and watching multiple Alder Lake CPU reviews, the results are in. In multi-threaded workloads such as Handbrake and Cinebench, the $290 12600K actually beats the $450 5800X. It even destroys the last generation 11900K, which is insane. Remember, we're talking about multi-core performance here, and Intel handily holds the crown. The 12700K slots in between the 5900X and 5950X, while the 12900K beats the 5950X stock and loses when overclocked. Again, the 12900K is $590, while the 5950X is $750, and it gets even crazier. In Cinebench single threading, all three Intel chips beat the 5950X, which foreshadows their gaming dominance. In most AAA titles at all resolutions, every single Intel Alder Lake chip, even the 12600K, beats even the 5950X. Where the chips truly shine, though, is at lower resolutions at which you are CPU bound. Of course, the 5950X will still beat the 12700K and 12600K in most production benchmarks, but if you're a gamer, Intel is once again your best option, and even with the 12900K, I mean, that thing slays at production, so I'd go Intel in almost every case now. A big struggle of Intel's over the past few years has been power consumption and thermals for its desktop Core series processors. Unfortunately, this thorn in Intel's side remains. Indeed, at each price bracket, the Intel chip consumes more power under load than the AMD chip, especially with power limits removed. Intel still leads the way in performance per watt, however. The thermal output is also a bit higher, with the mid-range 12600K running about as hot as the notoriously hot high-end 5800X, as an example. As always, just be sure you get an adequate cooling solution for your chip, including a well-ventilated case, good fans, and a good CPU cooler, again based on the MTP of the CPU. Historically, Intel has always reigned supreme when it comes to overclocking to squeeze every last bit of performance out of your CPU. Nowadays, however, both Intel and AMD pre-overclock their chips, so there really isn't much remaining headroom once you receive the chip. If you must know about the overclocking results versus AMD chips, maybe you have a 360mm AIO or a custom loop and you're ready to overclock, here you go. Wizard from Tech PowerUp stated in his review, quote, "I don't think it's worth overclocking the 12700K manually," end quote. This applies to all Alder Lake chips. I would trust him on that, as the TPU review is probably the most comprehensive one so far and the only one I found that has a page dedicated to overclocking with Alder Lake. No matter the cooling solution, TPU could only get the 12700K to 5.0 gigahertz at 1.4 volts, which is embarrassing since the chip's base clock is already 5.0 gigahertz. So if you're an extreme overclocker, today's mainstream AMD and Intel chips are not really for you, to be honest. They're just not, and overclocking is certainly going a little bit down the drain at this point on the mainstream platforms. As we all know, Windows 10 recently released, and it has experienced some issues. Current bugs with the OS include not being able to upgrade from Windows 10 directly, bugs with Intel networking software causing browsing slowdowns, the start menu still being the same, which it's not supposed to be, and the context menu loading slowly. The OS is still being ironed out, and I would wait a few months before switching. Windows 11 is still receiving regular updates and has bugs with both Intel and AMD chips. Nevertheless, Gamers Nexus tested the 12600K and 12900K on Windows 10 and Windows 11. Despite Intel recommending that reviewers test Alder Lake with Windows 11, Windows 10 had a very slight performance advantage over Windows 10 with Alder Lake chips. However, it is important to note that in a few months, with a few more Windows optimizations and updates, this will probably be reversed and Windows 11 will actually surpass Windows 10 because of new optimizations that Intel has done with its Thread Director, VBS, things like that. The way the CPU scheduler interacts with Intel Thread Director was supposed to be improved with Windows 11, but the truth is that at the moment, in November 2021, Windows 10 is too new to be reliable. Again, though, in just a few months, this whole thing will be reversed and Windows 10 should be better, or Windows 11 rather, should be better for Alder Lake chips. Because we're talking about Intel here, with the new CPU lineup comes new motherboards. There will reportedly be Intel H610 and H670 boards, but only the high-end Z690 boards have launched so far. This could be a turnoff for some buyers, as these Z690 boards can currently be found for a minimum of $170, with decent ATX boards starting at around $230 with some MSI boards. However, these boards have some key features that I will get to soon. Additionally, when the H610 and H670 chipsets are released, they will probably go for around $100 to $150. Unfortunately, they're not expected to release until 2022. When they do launch, it's unlikely they will receive DDR5 or PCIe 5.0 support, possibly not even PCIe 4.0. Although this isn't a huge deal, it really just depends on where your priorities are and how much money you have to spend. Oh, and quick edit, good Z690 ATX boards really start more around 210 for DDR4 boards and about 220 for DDR5 boards, not 530 or 230. 530, oh my god, that would be nuts. But anyways, yeah. So we can see that this wide gap in motherboard pricing between AMD and Intel could raise prices on the Alder Lake platform. But if you were to build a PC right now, which would cost more, Intel or AMD? Well, I made two mid-range combinations of a CPU and motherboard, which only DDR4 support. I'll get to why I want the DDR4 support and not DDR5. I'll get to that later. The Intel 12600K and MSI Pro Z690A DDR4 cost a total of $510, while the 5600X and MSI B550A Pro cost a total of $440. However, CPU cooler support on LGA 1700 is limited, so your favorite cooler may not be supported. Intel is certainly making the competition very interesting at the moment. A point of contention with Intel CPUs has been the limited upgrade path. Intel Alder Lake chips only work on Z690 boards, and Z690 boards only support Alder Lake chips. That means you cannot use your existing motherboard with Z690 or your existing CPU with a Z690 board. If you upgrade one part, you have to upgrade the other. However, we do have to cut Intel some slack, as this lack of support is due to the new DDR5 RAM sockets. At least Intel has confirmed that its upcoming 13th generation Raptor Lake CPUs will work with 600 series boards. By the way, I just love the word Raptor. I think it's really cool, and can't wait for Raptor Lake. I just like to say Raptor Lake, boys. Raptor Lake 13th Gen Intel, here we come. A key feature of Intel Alder Lake is support for DDR5 memory, something that AMD cannot boast. It's important to note that many Z690 boards don't support DDR5, so make sure you check the spec sheet if you really care about this at the moment. Every Z690 board that supports DDR5 seems to support DDR4 as well, up to 3200 MHz, but there are also slightly cheaper boards that support DDR4 up to much higher speeds, of course. Make sure you check the motherboard spec sheet before you buy it. I would not recommend switching to DDR5 memory yet if you have a kit of DDR4 handy. If you don't have any RAM and you're building like a new system for the first time, maybe consider going with DDR5. However, the technology is still very new, and the pricing and the cache latencies remain high for DDR5 kits. Getting the cheaper Z690 boards that only support DDR4 seems like a no-brainer for me, especially since in 2 generations you will have to upgrade your motherboard again, and then you will get DDR5 support once the technology has matured a bit more and pricing has come down and become more reasonable. The final thing that Intel would like you to think is a key selling point of its new chips is the 16 PCIe 5.0 lanes on each Z690 board connected directly to the CPU. PCIe 5.0 SSDs don't exist yet, but Z690 supports Gen 4 drives, and the new PCIe 5.0 GPU support means faster GPU speeds in the future with next-generation GPUs, and slightly faster SSD speeds right now, potentially. Some higher-end PCIe 4.0 SSDs can exceed 7,000 megabytes per second, which is the limit of PCIe 4.0. So PCIe 5.0 remedies this. However, the PCIe bus has not been a big bottleneck on GPUs, so PCIe 5.0 isn't a big upgrade yet. Additionally, you can install multiple PCIe 4.0 SSDs without taking away the PCIe 5.0 lanes for your GPU, which is not a feature AMD has yet, as they do not support PCIe 5.0 at the moment. Support for PCIe Gen 5 GPUs and faster SSD speeds is nice, but it's not a huge upgrade over AMD yet. To recap, Intel CPUs are better than AMD Zen 3. I can't believe it either. They seem to finally be heeding the feedback of the enthusiast PC building community. This return to competition is nothing but good for you, the consumer. And you can expect deep discounts on Zen 3 that will make the following question even harder to answer. Should you buy Intel or AMD in November 2021? My answer is don't buy either in November 2021. I would wait until H610 or H670 boards come out, but anyways. With their faster single-core multi-core speeds, competitive pricing, and support for new and upcoming technologies, you get a very compelling generation of mainstream desktop CPUs with Alder Lake. And if you're not used to me saying nice things about Intel, that's because they have sucked for the past few years, let's be honest. But these chips are extremely compelling, and I would buy them over AMD Zen 3 at the current pricing without the deeper Zen 3 discounts. And no, I am not sponsored by Intel. See you guys.